All right. Hello and welcome. This is the BentoComics SketchJam. Glad to be with you today. Bit of a break. I hope that you had a chance to listen to the last one. As always, subscribe if you like us. We'll put the link in on YouTube so you can find it easily. Today, my name is Dee DuPuy. I do a comic called Heartless. Today, we're going to be talking about bubbles.
Speech bubbles,
Bubbles.
bubbles.
Not the bubbles from the bubbles in Finding Nemo.
Bubbles, bubbles.
Narration bubbles as well.
Exactly.
Unless there's room.
Unless we can all get together and do a little chorus of that, because it's really the best part of Finding Nemo, isn't it? So today, let me introduce the members around the table on Skype. Let me start with Queenie Chan. Queenie does various comments. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
My name's Queenie. One of the first manga I drew was The Dreaming, and afterwards I worked as an illustrator for various authors. Right now I'm working on a new story called Fabled Kingdom, which would be out in November. And I'm glad to be part of this podcast.
Yeah, Queenie Chan, busy as always. Coming to you from Australia right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. On this side of the planet, Queenie and I are good morning. It's good evening for everybody else over in the U.S. Joining us today, we have Svetlana Chmakova, Dat S. Coming to us from Canada. Svet, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Thank you, Dee. I am a manga/comics author, and I'm working on a project right now that cannot be disclosed yet, but my previous works have included Nightschool, the Weird books, and DramaCon. Also, a couple of webcomics which are right now on hiatus and also kind of gone from the web, but not for long.
Join us on Ink Blazers.
I'm thinking about it, and actually one of my examples today is from Night Silver.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we all get this classic sort of webcomic past. And the last member of our group today is Myung Hee Kim.
Hello.
I will give your art gang name. We may evolve that later. We're all coming up with our own handles. Myung, you've met before. Myung, why don't you tell us what you're up to nowadays?
Well, by day, I am an animator and artist, generally in the game industry. And by night, I am a webcomic artist, and I'm currently working on a webcomic called Simon Sues.
Yeah, long-running webcomic.
Yeah.
You're also in print, too, so for those of you who like that print thing better.
In several countries.
Yeah, you do have lots of books, very heavy books. You use them to build your own bookshelves, that volume of books. So today we're going to be talking about dialogue bubbles. Boy, this is something that's unique to comics, isn't it? It's amazing. Something that's part of the art and the craft of doing comics, and something that you could definitely do well and also less well.
Yes.
So
I also want to talk about, I also just want to interject there, Dee, to say that it's not just speech bubbles. I actually think that thought bubbles are the ones that's unique to comics, because speech is something that movies do quite all the time, and while thought bubbles is something that the movies doesn't do. So I think that thought bubbles are actually what's unique to comics, and sometimes narrative bubbles as well.
Very interesting. So it's not just speech. There are narrative boxes, I guess, which sort of fit into that rubric of bubbles. All kinds of tricks that people have come up with to sort of explain both the external and the internal dialogue of a character and a narrator. My example shows you a pretty piss poor use of that and how you can get them mixed up and do them completely wrong. So I'll be tethering that end of the spectrum. So Myung, why don't you introduce the concept for us, and we could jump right in.
Okay. So last week, I think this topic came up because we were looking over some art. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we were talking about flow and helping the reader's eye move across the page. And so we thought it would be a good topic and a good exercise to show kind of a good example and then how, or maybe a bad example and then how to improve it. But I guess before we begin, I say maybe some good pointers in general for putting speech bubbles on your page. Mm-hmm. All right, so I wrote a little list very quickly, and some of the stuff is kind of self-explanatory.
What is this, a PowerPoint slide? Nice.
Oh,
PowerPoint presentation? Put that thing up.
no, I just wrote it. I just jotted it down really quickly. So,
Okay,
but
cool.
now you get to
So
look at this Finding Nemo.
I wrote it on her hand.
Oh, it's an audio list. Okay, I thought you were
Yes.
having an actual slide.
No.
Oh,
So,
man.
so as you mentioned, bubbles, thought bubbles, and speech bubbles are very prominent in comics, and it's one of the big art devices or plot devices, and it's very easy to do it wrong. And when you do it right, what happens is you get good graphic flow. So so one factor you have to worry about is how to place it so that you're considering reading order. So depending on whether the reader is left to right or right to left,
Yeah.
you want the bubbles to flow in a certain direction, and you want the reader's eye to go in a certain direction. You want where you actually, not just the reading direction, but where within the panel you place the bubble. So sometimes you have to contend with a very heavy art panel, and you have to decide what's the most optimal place to put your bubble, and how big the bubble should be, so that you're not covering important art portions.
Yeah.
Another thing is how big your bubble should be in relationship to the words that you're putting in there. So like what kind of space, how not to crowd your bubble, and how many sentences you should put in a bubble. So I don't think there's like a real hard rule on whether you put 1 or 2 sentences or a whole paragraph in a bubble. But
Kind of depends on the kind of comic you're doing too.
It does.
Maybe we should go over, just briefly, the difference between sort of Murakami, this superhero comics, very, very horizontally oriented bubbles, packed full of text, and the more manga style, which of course, since the language is written, top to bottom, is a more
Manga
vertically
style-
oriented bubble.
Yeah, manga tend to have more, as Dee just said, vertically oriented bubbles, which I never like, and I never like the horizontal ones as well. I actually prefer bubbles that are almost round, and it's always challenging when you do round bubbles because they tend to take up more space. But I feel that if my work's going to be translated into another language, I should always make the bubbles smaller than bigger. And I think sometimes even if you don't have an awful lot of text, making a larger bubble can give more room for the reader to read things. So the dialogue can have room to breathe, so to speak. It's a lot about like art placement as well, because dialogue is not art, but when you think about the graphic design component of trying to fit something into something, there's a lot of similarities between the two, and you do not want to cram every corner of your panel or whatever with detail.
Sure, that margin is important.
Right.
Yeah.
So just 2 more quick things before show an example of what you guys were just talking about.
Oh,
so,
okay, right. Shut up.
Really
fine, I'll just sit here, Queenie. We'll be quiet together.
So just also, cropping your bubbles. When you place it in a panel, and you don't want the bubbles to overlap or to hang on to another panel, when you should cut them. Tails on your bubble, and then font. So a lot of people underestimate the power of your font choices, and I'm sure Dee can talk hours and hours about fonts. But it's very easy to murder your whatever mood or whatever character you have built up by just picking a terrible font choice.
Good font, yeah. Nice.
Okay.
Good
So that was just my starting list, and I'm sure we'll come up with a lot more as we show examples.
That's a good list.
Yeah, and those are just kind of just the bubbles themselves, and then there's a whole nother bag of tricks and problems when you talk about bubbles and the art and flow of the panel layout.
Yeah, the
itself.
narrative sort of things.
Yeah.
We'll do that. We'll do a part 2. Let's try and stick with dialogue today.
Okay, so you guys found this example, side-by-side comparison of what you were talking about before about sort of the horizontal jam-packed bubble,
Yeah.
and then the manga version. So, Dee, I think you posted and you found this,
I just Googled it.
which came from like there was another article that had a lot more examples, but this is what we could salvage.
I think
It was,
that it was on Newsarama or something.
yeah, I didn't see.
It had like, comparison of, many pages of this manga version of Star Wars versus the sort of American version that came out, I guess, in the 70s.
It may have been comic book resources.
Yeah.
I really can't remember.
It was a
what the
classic
original
article.
was.
It really was amazing. It kind of swept through the blogosphere, the comics blogosphere when it first came out, but it appears to be down now.
Mm-hmm.
Damn you, Internet.
You guys can Google it.
Yeah, anyway, Google it.
Yeah, but anyway, you can clearly see it's the same scene,
Yeah.
but it's done or how it's executed is completely different. And some may say one is more successful than the other, but I feel that there's kind of like a tolerance to how much the reader will pay attention once you start cramming a bunch of words into one area. So I think for me personally, the bottom panel, I would stop paying attention and stop reading that and just sort of gloss over
You don't really
midway
dive.
in the first bubble there.
Yeah.
Or that
But then
first
you'd miss
text.
the action because they're not even showing his hand getting cut off.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the other significantly bad faux pas is that the most important part is being blocked by the structure in the foreground.
Yeah. I think they did
I
that
like-
deliberately to spare the children.
I don't know. I think that, well, I don't know if this, I think if you've read the comic, you've pretty much seen the movie and you know what's going to happen.
Comics get held to these weird ass standards that, movies or games don't. I don't know why,
I like how we are able to see his eye as well. Like, it's not just his, we get to see his hand cut off, but we also get to see his expression,
Yeah, good
which
point.
is what draws in the reader. We
That
usually
close.
seeing the expression of the face.
That close up, yeah, good point.
I would agree with that. I think faces are so important, in tense moments. And the bottom panel because you can't see anyone's face really in the bottom panel. That it just diffuses the whole situation. There's no tension whatsoever. And the top one, you can, it's.
It's got a mood to it, doesn't it?
Oh, just look at Darth Vader. I love the contrast in the top panel. Like Darth Vader is all dark and Luke is all white. And so it's almost saying that the darkness is triumphing over the light here. And there's a completely white background, so there's no mistake about what's happening and what it's trying to convey. The bottom one, it has color, but
The bottom one is very beautiful. It's technically beautifully rendered, and just the amount of detail is staggering. But the one that draws my eye is, the top one, just because of the emotion that's been captured in there. Like, all the important stuff is in there, and the rest is, white background.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you can definitely have something that's technically very well done and well rendered, but just as a storytelling piece, it's not as impactful.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the case on the bottom.
Yeah.
I think we should
There's
also talk about what comes before and what comes after these two panels. I think judging just a single page or a single panel might be, it might not be the best thing to do. I mean, but we don't have the panels that came before and after these ones, so I don't know how the story flows. Maybe on the bottom panel, despite the non-stop text scrolling by, maybe it has a good reason for that, depending on what the previous and the next panel is of. But we don't have that, so we don't. Maybe we're.
I can't read all that text. It's just too much. It intimidates me.
It's supposed to be an exciting moment, man.
Yeah.
He's a child of the television.
Well,
Pictures.
Well, no,
That's why I do comics. If I wanted to read a bunch of stuff, I'd get a book. But the top panel is not completely silent. So the part that you miss when you read manga, if you're not a native speaker, is the large sound effect that's going on over there. So, there is actually that immersive, kind of experience where there's a sound effect, which I have no idea what that sound effect means.
Actually, I believe that. It's a scream.
Oh, it's a scream. So that kind of
I
colors the,
Well, his hand just got cut off. I imagine anyone would scream.
Yeah, nice. Whereas this one, the bottom panel is completely silent. You don't even get any motion lines. I mean, I guess it's not fair to judge all superhero comics, or that kind of Marvel style, because this is a very old, panel. I guess it's done in the 70s or the 80s or something like that. So things have
Queenie's
moved
right,
on.
though. Queenie's right, though. It's difficult to judge just one panel. Do you have more examples?
Yeah. So I think that we like manga better in this instance. Move on to something with some
bias. Just a little bit.
Okay. Next example, please.
Well, that's all I got. So.
Oh yeah.
Oh, would you like to see some very badly placed speech balloons?
Let's talk about speech balloons.
So are we moving on to everybody's? So everybody today has brought their own samples of successful page.
Oh wait,
and something.
I didn't know we were supposed to do successful.
Oh.
Okay, who's going to
A
start?
page that we can discuss.
Yeah.
I will have to go in about 10 minutes, so should I bring up my example first?
Okay.
And it will be a little bit strange compared to what other people are going to do, but whatever. I'll give it my shot, my best shot.
Go Queenie.
Okay. Change screen. Share screen. Start. Am I sharing my screen now?
Still coming up.
Ooh. Oh crap.
Maybe we should have tried this before the podcast. Please excuse technical difficulties. We need to. Oh, you know what we need?
Nice
We
view of
need
your
one of
desktop.
those.
Oh, it's working. Sorry. Is it working? You can see it now?
Yeah, huh?
Oh, sorry, terrible art quality because this is an InDesign, but this is just showing speech bubbles, so it's okay. I'm doing something a little bit different to conventional comics. It's called Comics Prose, and it's a mix of prose and comics. And so right here you see what happens is that the story is about this girl who, at this point in the story, it's about this girl who gets a hamper and she's going to go off to her grandmother's house. And this paragraph up here talks a little bit about her hamper, and then she's interrupted by her stepmother who waltzes in through the door. And I break off the prose here, which ends with her thinking about what her hamper is like and what she's putting in there. And I start the scene with her back to the door and someone just saying, hey, hello, so you're going off to grandmother's house. And she turns around. And I didn't want people to notice the way that I place the dialogue and the way the characters are facing. Because I think sometimes where you place dialogue boxes in relation to where the characters are standing are very important. So, for example, she's facing that way, and the dialogue comes from behind her, and then she turns around and she says, stepmother, and that's her again, you've come back early. And I've put here a little narrative box. I really like, sometimes I really like decorating my narration boxes, because I think there's no other way sometimes to tell who someone is and what they do. And it's just a convenient way to just drop information into the middle of a panel. And so, blah, blah, they talk. Next panel, and here's an example of where I break up a dialogue. She says, not at all, I was planning to stay at grandmother's house for 2 days. That's 2 separate sentences, and I don't think you need to break things up. But I always like to break up my dialogue when it's about 2 separate things. So she's denying in the first denying something in this first small dialogue, and then she gives a reason in the next one. So I like to break those two into separate dialogue boxes, and then she says, what, and there's a bit more text about what she thinks about the whole situation, and they play wrestle a bit. Once again, there's a way that you can follow the dialogue in, and so that goes from left to right and down the page. This format's a little interesting because earlier what we talked about was that there are always going to be problems in trying to choose what you want to put in a dialogue, because there's limited space in a comic. So if you have a lot of information you want to give to the reader, you will have to pick and choose about which information you want to put in the dialogue and trying to kick everything else out so you don't overwhelm the panels with text. And one of the problems I solved that with Comics Prose is to just leave some of the dialogue, the less important dialogue, or maybe some of the descriptions or some of the exposition, or just the plain story, just in prose, and only do the important moments in comics format. So this is something like that. Here's an example of another narrative box again, when I tell you where this place is and what it looks like, etc. Does anyone has anything else to say?
I would like to mention to our viewers that these are all examples of well-placed speech balloons. They have a clear sight line. Like my eye has no problem understanding where I should go next, which speech balloon should be read next.
Yes. One of the ways you could do that is to minimize the amount of speech balloons everywhere, and I actually do put a fair amount of them here, but I never go more than 3. And if I have more than 3, I make sure it's only 2 people speaking. Like in this case, it's actually 3-word balloons. 2 of them are connected and there's only 2 people speaking. Here, there's 3-word balloons, but once again, there's only 2 people speaking. If I go into 4-word balloons, I make sure there's only 2-word balloons in that 2 of them are connected to each other. So that's one way you can make sure a conversation can be easily followed, because the more people you have in a single panel who are speaking, the more you should just break that panel up into separate panels so that it's not so hard to figure out who is talking to whom and about what and where. I mean, panels are also thematic as well. You try and link dialogue according to theme. If someone's talking about one thing and then they move on to something completely separate, it's better that you put it into a second panel than trying to cram everything into the one panel, because it can be confusing when you're talking about 2 separate things within the same panel. It's just my opinion anyway.
Well, it certainly would be a challenge to clearly indicate which part of the panel is being spoken about. Like it is possible, but it is a bigger pain in the butt.
Oh yeah, it's always a challenge, I think, more so if I'm doing this style of thing. But at the end of the day, with comics prose and with normal comics, I think that it's about deciding what is more important and what is less important. In a comics prose, you take the most important elements and you bring them to the forefront, and you push the less important elements to the prose and just leave it in prose. And with normal comics, it's exactly the same. You want to do things that are that draw the reader's attention, that are important to the plot, and you want to bring this to the forefront and try and push everything into the background. The dialogue is exactly the same. You try and say things that are important to the plot or to character development. And for things that are not important, you either push it to a separate panel or just leave it out. And that's how I've always done my comics, whether traditional or not.
This could also be very beneficial in terms of picking which scenes you want to draw as an artist. For example, I could easily see myself, like if I had a scene of a character running through a crowded marketplace, I would write that out. I would rather not draw that,
This is an example of thinking something, and it's quite fun because in manga especially, you don't always have thought bubbles. And sometimes you choose not to put something in a thought bubble. I mean, this particular thing, she's thinking, have I seen the wolf before? And there's a reason why I didn't choose a dialogue bubble for this. It's because it is less, this particular sentiment from her is less an active thought and more like a sudden idea that strikes her mind. And I think that sometimes if you have something that is an unconscious or subconscious idea that floats upwards, it's best to leave it outside of a thought bubble, because these sort of thinking isn't conscious, it's subconscious, and not having a thought bubble and just putting it in italics over the art can have a very, very powerful effect, as opposed to a straightforward thinking, which would be represented by a thought bubble.
Which people tend not to use as much anymore.
Yeah, but I think thought bubbles has its place.
I do too. I don't know how they fell out of fashion, but that was some big controversy that swept through the comics vlogosphere about how they were, I don't know, I guess they were seen as amateurish or something. I have no idea why a thought bubble is bad, but a dialogue bubble is good.
What happens?
Well, if you look at it, maybe it's just
why. This guy who worked in superheroes told me why and how thought bubbles actually fell out of favor with Western comic publishers. And it's because of The Watchmen. He said that The Watchmen, because of its more cinematic sort of storytelling, it kind of had big effects on the way people perceived on the evolution of Western comics. And because he didn't use any thought bubbles, or at least, pretty much any thought bubbles in that story, people were thought that we have evolved to the point where we don't need thought bubbles anymore, which is really ridiculous, because thought bubbles, it's about how you use them. Okay, if you use them badly or stupidly, then yes, of course, they're terrible and useless. And that's exactly what people have been doing with them. That's why The Watchmen is so amazing, I suppose, but that's what happened.
I think people forget that just because somebody chooses to not use a device or to not use something doesn't mean it's good or bad.
Yeah.
It's just it's their particular the style that they're trying to achieve with their comic. It's just like with any other medium. There's
That's what they
there's
forgot.
certain ways, there's certain executions, and it's not good or bad.
You should keep your toolbox as open as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what does the Watchmen know about? I'm going to get in trouble for that, but I don't know. Man, it's so old, Why are we still looking back to that? I mean, I think people have really moved on. I was surprised to read the Watchmen because I didn't read it the first time it came around and see that the panels were all the same size and shape, and there were the same number of panels on each page. And to me, that was a style of comics I had never seen before. So I don't think even American superhero comics do that anymore. I know.
No, it was just an influential story that.
Well, why do people not want to do their panels like that if they just don't want to have thought bubbles? I mean, what?
Actually, I heard it was editorially mandated. The editors actually said no.
Yeah.
When speech bubbles allowed, no thought bubbles allowed. That's what they said. Yeah. So.
I think you can do whatever you want. I don't
think
care
so
what
too.
the Watchman says. Yeah, do it well. Okay, good. So, it might be interesting to sort of catalog all of these different kinds of ways that people express this stuff. So, I think I haven't seen the sort of bubble, kind of tail on a thought bubble in a million years. But, manga uses this quite a bit. They just tend to leave the tail off. So the thought looks different. One of my favorites is Skip
But
Beat.
it has to be bleeding obvious who's thinking that.
Yeah, of course.
Usually it's a single panel with a single person and those words on the side, so there's no mistake who is thinking what.
Yes.
If you have more than one person in the panel, then depending on how you place the person, it could be confusing as to.
Right. Placement is very, very important. So, so the example of Skip
is an issue as well, because this panel is when the girl thinks, do I know this wolf? Have I seen him from somewhere? She's interrupted by her grandmother opening the door. And she's like, oh, hi. And the grandmother's like, come in. And then she looks back again and the wolf is gone. And she says, here, it's gone. And this is, again, not a thought bubble, even though it's a conscious thought. But it's a continuity issue is that in the previous panel here, she didn't have a thought bubble. And here, she didn't have one either because it's a continuity. If I could have added a thought bubble in here because it is conscious thought, but it doesn't link into the previous panel, so I just left it as just without a thought bubble.
Okay.
So in Skip Beat, I don't know if everybody's seen this, but it's having a resurgence. What I liked was the sort of layering that they had. So the main character would have these dialogues with people, and her dialogue would be completely different from what she was actually thinking. Yeah. So she would have this internal monologue that was running along beside her, overt speech. And the play of these two things, her internal dialogue and her external dialogue, was absolutely fascinating in this book and very well done. But as you say, Queenie, it was critical that the balloons be placed properly. So, again, it was a spacing issue, I think. So, Myung?
I was going to say my pet peeve is when there's, you get used to a certain convention when an author or comic artist is using this certain thought bubbles versus over narration versus speech, and then they just throw it out the window and they like switch it up and do something else and for no reason.
Yeah.
And then so I'm like in a completely so I have one mindset as to the character's motivations or what they're feeling or their dynamics with the other character based off of what bubble it's in. And when you mix that up with no reason and no warning, I completely lose the message or the story that the author was telling because I've just gotten confused by their choice of because they didn't have a convention for bubbles.
You have to be consistent with it, and that's a fact. Svet, why don't you get your example up real quick? So I think another thing too is this kind of treatment that sort of draws attention to itself. Like I've seen comics where people will actually change the font depending on who's speaking. I think you have to be careful with stuff like that, because, the whole thing about a dialogue bubble is that you're supposed to read and absorb this as easily as possible, right? And anything that calls attention to the craft of what you're doing really takes away from the story, I think.
Yeah, there was like a conversation somebody was having in one forum, and they were talking about immersion and then getting distracted by the medium. So there's immersion, and then there's like immersion with the medium. So you could be in a virtual reality setting and be just constantly reminded that you're in a virtual reality setting, so you're never completely immersed.
Yeah. So that's the skill of what it is you're trying to do. So good examples there, Queenie, because you have a sort of a unique way of presenting your stuff. So Svet, what do we got here? This looks like Night Silver, is it?
Yes, this is an old webcomic that I had on wirepop.com. You guys all remember Wirepop? So this is an example of a page that really should have been 2 pages, and this is a hot mess, this whole thing. I drew it, and then
Nice.
I realized it's like, you don't know, you're pretty sure you're supposed to start, panel number 1, speech balloon number 1. This is speech balloon number 2. And then next panel, I guess this is the first balloon. This must be the second, third,
Nice. This is beautiful.
fourth, maybe. And then, well,
Everyone's done this. Everyone has this in their history.
so okay, like this.
Oh, nice.
If you work
The
for it,
trajectory.
if you work for it, you can sort of work out this really unfortunate path that I've chosen to display my visual information for this particular page.
I like it.
But then you get here and it's like, where do you go? Is it here or is it here? And I'm trying to redo this, well, not redo, but reformat this comic a little bit for print, because I was doing this back when I didn't know what DPI was, or print resolution, or hey, margins and bleed. So I did, it's the same art.
Nice.
It's the same art, and I cut some of the dialogue, and I just tried to display it a little more conveniently, I guess, for the reader.
How interesting. And so your task was to do this without changing the paneling or the art, right?
That's right, because
So you
I
just
told
changed the
myself I
bubbles.
would not redraw.
Okay, cool. Can you put those up side by side?
No, it's in Photoshop.
But you can see very clearly that it's much easier to tell where the line goes when to read.
Oh, tear it off.
Yeah, just tear it off
Tear
into a
the
different window.
Do what, sorry?
Hold it.
Hold your mouse down on the tab on that title that you were just on, and just pull it off.
Oh, I see. I learned a new thing today. Okay.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's terrible. Okay, am I doing
Put
this?
it side by side. No, yeah. Don't let it dock again, or then.
You're embarrassing Windows users.
Oh, no. I'm not a representative Windows user. I am an artist. Please take pity on me.
Okay. Pull it over just a little bit more so we can see them both.
This way?
Yeah, don't let it dock. Good. Perfect. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Margins are good. Okay, this is good. Wow. What a difference.
Yeah, the margins really, really help. I also got to say that in the first panel, the balloon on the very bottom, it's a good thing to put part of it outside the panel, as in, it's not a perfectly round circle. It's kind of pushes up against the border, because then it leads directly into the second panel and the word balloon in the other one. That was a really good choice to do that.
So what is the rule, if I could ask? I mean, is there a rule of whether you should have the panel completely internal? So, for example, look at your panel 1 there, Svet, on the right, on your redone page. So the top of the dialogue bubble has been cut off, yes, which means it's inside, yeah? And then, if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, panel 8, where the guy is sniffing his fingers, what?
This refers to a previous page.
And he says, wait, that dialogue balloon has come over the panel border. So what's the thinking there?
It leads into the second one. I do that sometimes when you're trying to direct the reader into the next panel, because that clearly tells you that's the following panel. Because if you're talking about the very last panel, the panel with the 2 guys shouting at each other, it would be easier to read if you push that panel to the right-hand side a bit more, so that it doesn't jut out into the panel with the two guards in the door. Because then the last 3 panels, on a cursory glance, it could be hard to figure out which one comes second and which one comes third. But with the dialogue balloon overlapping in the the third panel from the second panel, it's clear that the third panel follows on from number 2. You know, so you presume that the guy sniffing his fingers is the second panel in that sequence.
Let's not fixate on him sniffing his fingers.
But
I fixate on things like that.
okay, but why is it that my eye goes immediately? So in the redrawn page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How come I know that I'm supposed to go to panel 5 and not 6? Yeah. So in your previous example, you see where you end up at that finger. You could go either way, but I think it's clear to me now that I'm sliding down into panel 5.
I'm trying to count them right now. This
Okay.
is panel 5 to you, or?
No, not the sniffing fingers panel. Start at the beginning. 1, 2,
1,
3, 4,
3,
5. The crazy priest. That's panel 5.
No, this is panel 5, and this is.
Oh crap!
Yes, this is an example of, I fixed the balloons, kind of, but the problem with the panels remained. I told myself I would not redraw this, so I'm just gonna have to live with it. But this was an example of this really should have been 2 pages, because there's no way to lay out this much action in just half a page without. Like, what I could do theoretically is take this and push it even further this way, right? But then it'll be squished in the corner. And there's quite a bit of dialogue here, so it'll just look really crowded. Whereas, this panel, okay, it'll be obvious that that's panel number 5, but there's only 2 speech balloons in there.
Nice. Yeah.
So it's not gonna...
So you can't fix everything, but you can fix a lot of stuff. Yeah.
You can fix quite a bit, but better planning is a must before you get to this stage.
See our podcast on thumbnails. They're important.
Yes, very important.
But I think, if you're going to put a little effort into bringing your older work, to try and repackage it a little bit, to, apply what you've learned in the interim, this is a trap. You can get caught redrawing this stuff. You don't want to do that. But I mean, if you're just going to, try and spiff it up a little bit, man, redoing your dialogue is, boy, that really works. Yeah, and just putting that margin in there is amazing. Wow.
Yeah, this is another example of another page, which also, it's not the most successful, again, just because of the amount of action that I tried to cram into it, the amount of visual information. But again, just sprucing up the stupid speech.
Wow, I remember all of these pages.
I know, me too. And these characters, yeah. Yeah, wow. Just giving it a little room to breathe. Oh, and you redid the sound effect too in panel 1.
Yeah, it doesn't suck anymore. How about that?
That is very cool. Svet, you used to be the worst speaking about fonts, okay? Let me just rag on Svet a little bit. Boy, because you used to handwrite your comic, right? And some people have very good handwriting. And then there's Svet.
Hey, if it's readable, it's okay.
Yeah, that was your philosophy. And I remember having these discussions, but I think it's better, it's like
Discussions? I remember yelling.
Yeah, that was like, Svet, you're not doing justice to your art by using these crappy fonts. And your Svet is like, what?
It's like, I just spent 6 hours drawing this page. You seriously want me to exert more effort on writing this stupid dialogue?
That is the thing, because it's like, if you don't feel, you've just spent days slaving over this art. The last thing you want to do is slave over your bubbles and stuff like that.
And over the years, I have come to see and understand your point of view, Dee. I agree now. It is very important.
Let me get that retroactive, you are right. I'm going to have that write you down.
You've got this recorded. This is going to be on the internet.
Oh my God, I'm putting it on my calendar. I just, I have seen handwritten comics that are brilliant. But if you are
this wasn't it, obviously.
I just am thinking about, because again, it's that kind of stunty thing where you're really kind of looking at somebody's handwriting. And, here in the redone panel, your fonts have made that kind of effort disappear. So in some ways, your eye just consumes that easily because everything is quite regular and has a consistent margin. And, it keeps you inside the story, which is what you want. Boy, you've got a lot of stuff going on in here. You've got shouting. a combination of shouting and talking, narration. Nice. Wow.
Yeah, it's still like this is another example of a page that really should be 2 pages. I didn't, again, my vow was to not redraw. So I cannot allow myself that luxury. All I could do was make the speech balloons less sucky and change their placement. Like here, they're not sure where to go, but here they're all in a line.
Yeah. And
then you get the sound effect calls attention to itself, and then that leads to the reaction faces. And from there, it's a straight line to the halt thieves, and we see the menagerie of the guards coming in.
I'm following it. Let's just zero in on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, panel 5, which is where the guys bust in through the hole in the wall. Yeah. So if you look at that dialogue balloon on the left, the halt thieves, more spikes and bigger text. But the dialogue balloon on the right works better with less spikes and smaller text. So why is that?
That's a good question. Well, these spikes are very uneven, and they look like somebody sneezed on the page.
You didn't sneeze on the page, did you?
It's possible. It was very late at night. I always drew these pages. I was finishing these parts, like the speech balloons and the dialogue, was the last thing that I did, and it was usually at 2 a.m. at night, and I was already late because the page was supposed to go up at midnight, and I wanted to get it over with.
I remember those days, yeah.
But like, putting boldface on words or putting certain italics on stressed words or things that have accents helps a lot too.
Yeah, so you've got an italic and a bold on that, and it really makes it pop.
And it has more space, more buffer within the bubble.
Yeah, that's hard to do in handwriting too, that kind of italic. And so usually when you get a dialogue font, it will have just a regular case. They're usually all caps. Please stop using mixed case fonts for your comics, guys. It's impossible to read. Don't do that. So it's usually all uppercase, but they'll come with like an italics version and also a bold version. And then I see where you've used, like in your last panel, where the word map is bolded. You can use that for emphasis so you can get the cadence of the speech, right? Nice.
And I guess I kind of lied. I did move the art a little bit down. Like this group here, I moved it down to give more room for the dialogue and for this panel to read better.
Moving it is fine.
Adjustment.
As long as you don't redraw it. Yes. Well, this is very exciting. I haven't seen the redone pages. Looks good. I'm liking it.
As an example of a successful page that I feel is successful is a page from Nightschool, one of the later books, because the first books were still suffering from some problems. But here, again, clear line of we see the name of the place where the people are, and then first we hear them talking, and then we see them. So this is a step-by-step introduction to the scene where I vary my elements along the way of this visual line of sight. And then move on to the speech balloons, and we see the characters better. And just a really clear progression of information that is presented on this page.
Yeah.
And then the very next page.
Nice big balloons.
Yeah, the very next page is a bit of a failure, unfortunately, because I have the first speech balloon, I have the second speech balloon, and then I have an element of interest to which I drew the eye by the sound effect. And then you should be going here, but the eye automatically goes to the next panel. And that's a failed attempt at visual flow. Because you completely miss these two panels until you realize there's more stuff here. I should read that first.
Yeah.
But if they weren't here, it would be beautiful. 1, 2, 3, her face, 4, 5, 6, and then the flow again of words and faces.
Yeah, it's like the flow just ellipses those panels. It just cuts them right out of there, so you don't even see them. How interesting.
Yeah. So that was an unfortunate decision on my part.
Thumbnails,
and I didn't
kids.
see it. I did the thumbnails, but I just didn't see it until I put the dialogue in.
Yeah.
So thumbnails with dialogue is another important lesson I learned.
Wow. Yeah, because a lot of people don't do that. They'll just put whatever it is in last, you know?
I've learned the hard way that
to make space for your balloons?
To put the dialogue in your thumbnail.
The dialogue in, that's right.
And a lot of people work so small with their thumbnails that they don't really, it's almost like you have to do a second version of your thumbs, like a second pass to get everything in there. A little bit bigger version.
I think it's easier if you're working digitally.
So then you could just enlarge that, right?
Yeah.
You got some big old balloons in there.
There was a lot of text on this page. I was having trouble getting all the figures in.
Okay, here's what everybody wants to know: did you ink those panels and then put the balloons on top, or do you put this is the classic D trick, very big balloon, so I don't have to draw all that.
Very big balloon while I was penciling, so no, I did not ink anything underneath that.
Nice one. I'm like, crap, I can't get that hand in there. I know, I'll just make him talk. That's how not to do it. Okay. Yeah. Did I type these pages?
These ones you did, yeah.
Nice. Okay.
I think I did the rain effects possibly, but you did all the tones.
I remember the hair. She had such shiny white hair. Yeah.
Yeah, this is nice. A favorite page of mine, where we see the speech balloon and the face of the astral, and then she picks up the little notebook, and then right from here you go into her lifting it up to show to Alex, and Alex, we see her expression along with her whatever reaction she had, what she said, and then immediately you see what the result of that reaction. So that's got a nice visual flow here.
Yeah. So you hand draw your balloons, yeah?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So Myung, when we hand it over to you, we'll take a look at how not to do that.
I should do that now because that's it from me.
Yeah, nice. Those are beautiful. I like.
Good job. Yeah.
It's interesting to contrast it with Queenie's style because she prefers a much more regular, very round sort of thing. And I think that integrates well with the kind of text that she uses. But for me, I like these big, fat, organic bubbles. They look like they're floaty, Okay, Myung, what do you got? Nice.
Okay, well, let me steal the screen and show you some really embarrassing stuff.
Good. Start with the embarrassment.
From a while ago.
Bring it on.
So this was, like Svet, also a comic that I had on Wirepop. I'm just going to make it really small so nobody can focus on it yet.
No.
How bad
that's cheating. You make that bigger.
All right. So here is a bad example of one, terrible font choice. So at the time, I think I was using Comic Sans. I didn't have any custom fonts.
That's not Comic Sans.
That's not Comic Sans, no.
Oh, all right. No. Oh, no. Originally, I was.
Okay.
The entire comic was done in Comic Sans, and then somebody on the site said, you should not use that font because it looks very unprofessional. Yeah, and it's on the hard drive of every single Windows user.
Let's just go ahead and confess about our early years.
I think Papyrus is also a banned font.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, and in addition, the text is touching the sides of the balloons in a lot of places, which, for me, I think that it's terrible layout. It's terrible design sense. So it's like tangents. You shouldn't have tangents whenever bad tangents. So notice, let me get
make it a little bit
pen.
bigger if you can. It's
hold on.
It's got to be smaller when you. Come on now, let's just get up here. Hey,
right, the art walk of shame.
Hey, at least you guys' examples are from years ago. Mine I did last week. So there's that.
Well, I'm finding like even just stuff that I did a couple of months ago is completely different. It's a complete improvement to what I was doing, to what I'm doing now. So you're always getting better. Well, notice here and here and all over the place. The font is just the size of the text is
So big.
crammed into the bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the flow, let me see if I can remember. It goes here, then here, then here, then
Oh
here,
my
then here, then
God.
here, and then here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is not what I would have guessed.
Yeah. So this bubble is poorly placed because a lot of the bubble volume is over this panel. So you might assume that this bubble is connected to what's happening here, but it's not. It's actually, supposed to go with this bubble. Yeah. So that was a bad. And plus, like a lot of the thought that I didn't break up each in this bubble especially, kind of like the shift in mood or the shift in what Queenie was saying before, what you're talking about, the subject matter. It's a good idea to break that up into two different bubbles so that your mind isn't jumping all over the place within one bubble. So I would have broken this up into two bubbles. And then just the art itself in addition to it being really old, it's just it's not laid out really well as far as like perspective and then interesting composition. In
I
general,
like the composition.
Yeah, composition is interesting. I mean, I can follow that. It's funny that Svet's early work and your early work have some of the same. I don't want to call them errors, but lack of experience in common. And one of them is margins. Yeah, just giving the text room to breathe. And I think there's some sort of technical issues that we were working out when we were all on Wirepop back in the day, because you're working at a certain size for print, yes, and then you also have to shrink the art to deploy it on the web. So you're not really clear what point size you need to be using so people can read your speech, et cetera, et cetera. So at least some of those were technical issues, though I think it's like kind of a mental sort of thing. It's like leaving the margins on the dialogue balloon, very important.
Well, once you see it, you can't unsee it, but until you do, obviously you don't apply it to your work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just building that visual vocabulary. Also, like the line weight on these bubbles is very thin, so sometimes it blends in with the background, which can psychologically, I think,
and
make it
is
hard
there
to
a
read.
tail on the bubble at the bottom?
Oh, and look at this. My dear, over every single word is
Your
on
font
a
is
separate line.
huge. Yeah.
Every word. Yeah. So font size was another issue. And I actually didn't think about font size until I printed. And then when I saw it, I was like, this looks like
Right,
it's
exactly. Yeah, there's a balance there. So is there a tail on any of these balloons? No tails.
No,
okay.
There are no tails.
A very manga
So for the
overview.
longest time,
Yeah.
I was against it. Well, it was also, kind of my own sort of rule, like my honor code, that if I had to put a tail to indicate where the person was talking, then I didn't place the bubble correctly.
That's your pride
So
there.
yeah, there's some cases where that's not true, where where tails are necessary and they are a good part of the design. But some people abuse them, where their bubbles all over the place, and then they have a tail that maybe the bubbles over here, and then all of a sudden the tail crosses across.
No.
Forget the tail, that's long like that is pointed and looks like a spear. I have seen that, and it's just like violent,
Looks like an explosion.
Yeah, exactly.
So the article that I read, and I wish I could remember where it was, they were talking about tails crisscrossing too much. So that was a no, a don't, as well as tails that have varying weight or varying thickness. So some people would make their tail like on the same page, this thickness, and then they would make it this thin. So they weren't being consistent, even on the same page.
I found that if you have to use a really long tail, you failed.
Yeah, well, that was my thinking, but I was
right.
applying it very strictly across.
If you can use just a little tiny tail, then you know you've got your placement right, I think, as a general rule. Okay.
I love that lady's shirt. Speaking of tangents,
oh god, she's like giant shoulder pads. I don't know. I think I was watching some like 90s throwback movie when I drew this or something. All right. I think so. This one, and I have to bring up the original thumbnail, because what I ended up doing was once I changed the panels, I kind of deleted the thumbnail, and they now only exist in this PDF that I made. So I kind of like, once I do my thumbnail script, I send it to my phone and I read it on like a mobile device. Because for me, that's really the only way that I can take a step back and look at layout and dialogue without
just squish it into your phone.
Being an artist. Kind of.
Nice.
Well, not just because it's smaller, but because psychologically I'm in a different role. I'm more of a reader than I am.
You've given yourself some distance there.
Whereas, like,
that's an interesting tactic.
Yeah, I mean, some people can do it while they're drawing or when they're working on their computer. But for me, I really need to have that disconnect.
I need another person for that.
Yeah, or another set of eyeballs, maybe. The phone, it works. Okay.
Yeah. So kind of some general rules that I picked up for myself that I think tend to make more successful bubble placement is like try to place it as near the head of the character when even if it's a thought bubble, because it just gives the illusion that they're talking or that they're thinking. So for example, like I had this over here. So it was hard to tell whether he was surprised or he was surprised. So you want to place your bubble as close proximity to whoever is doing that action as possible. I also like to put my bubbles on last on separate layers so I can play around with them. So I tend to draw my thumbnails with the bubbles in the art, but then once I start doing pencils and inks, I'll take the bubbles out and then put them in digitally or in separate layers.
I have an overwhelming need to put those two question marks with the speech balloon over the bookcase.
So the other thing was like which side of his head to put it on, and it was kind of a pacing. So for me, this is something that I constantly sort of juggle, and I waffle a lot. So for me, it's like, is he surprised first and then do the action, or does he do the action and
timing
then
issue?
just,
How interesting. Yeah.
So if I put it on this side, then it was kind of, for me, it felt a little bit too late, but putting it here kind of connected these two. This
looks like they're both
guy
surprised.
and this guy. Plus, Oh, and then on the original, this is speaks more towards just composition, but I had Simon and Isaac both aligned in the same horizontal, in the same vertical longitude.
Nice.
So it was longitude. So it was stopping the action or the flow. So it went like right down the middle, but by offsetting him, it helped.
So what is the final placement
move
of
the
this
flow
balloon?
a little bit from here to here?
Yes, tell us.
Right here.
No.
Okay.
Oh, it ended up right here. Sorry.
That
Ended
would
up right
make him
there.
say something else to cover up those books. Those meticulously rendered books. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing, I ended up swapping these two panels because of I felt like, I'm trying to remember, the impact was better, that continuous dialogue versus him getting broken up, delaying this bubble, the I'm sorry bubble, to later, um, and placing it with the character saying it. So originally I had this bubble here, and it was a disconnect because you couldn't connect what he was thinking or saying with the actual face. So I moved it to here, but then I had to worry about like this bubble because it was bigger. So I didn't want to get it too close to the edge, but I didn't want to cross over too far left so that this was off sides with the I'm sorry bubble. So it was harder to tell which was coming first. So I had it overlap a little bit, and for me, my rule for when you overlap panels is kind of like bleeding action, when you want whatever's happening in this panel to carry over or to have some type of influence over what's happening in the other panel. I tend to like have the bubble overhang on the other panel. So that's why I let this hang a little bit, and as well as logistically, I needed it to be more left than
So
this
you
bubble.
spend
want to
actually,
nail them.
The order was
I just want to
correct.
nail them in place right now.
yeah, stop moving them. You're making us freak out. So you actually spend quite a bit of time after you do the art,
Plus you can
playing with
see
the different sort of, the orders and things. So you've actually switched the panels. I'm looking at your original thumbs, right? So what's going on in panel 2 and 3 is actually quite sophisticated because, how do I interpret that? So he's talking in panel 3, but the thing that he says second is in panel 2? No, the thing that he says first is in panel 2. And then he finishes up with how pathetic is that in panel 3, right? Okay, yeah. So I think that we understand that, the dialogue bubbles should be placed depending on the order that a person's native language is in, right, from left to right. But also there's some, hierarchy as far as height goes. So, sometimes you pick the top bubble over the bottom bubble as to what comes first. So it's quite tricky to have to switch that around, right? And you've done this with this connecting bridge between the two dialogues, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I broke up. It was all in one big bubble if you look at the thumbnail, and I wanted it to be broken up so that way, and this is the reason why I swapped the panels, was because having him there and what he was saying there together in the same panel was more important to me than not having than losing that real estate space and then having to deal with connecting the two bubbles together and one being higher than the other. So plus I wanted, again, the bubble to be in fairly close proximity to his head, as opposed to like, because there's all this space here down and below. But again, I didn't want to get it too far towards the crop, towards the not text safe.
You have those technical sort of considerations as well.
And I wanted to flow
keeping it in the text safe area, or you're gonna screw it up because your bleed will clip it or whatever.
Yeah. The hard part is that, especially when you're considering print for different dimensions.
Yeah, again, because this is going on in a printed book as well as on the web. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the print has different dimensions. Like whoever the printer is has, like, one is not like just proportionately is proportionally different and not just scale different. So it's wider than the other. Let me think. Oh, so I wanted to bring up the idea of, I guess you guys were talking about showing, not telling. So I tended to, in the beginning, because of, I guess, the nature of the comic, have a lot of dialogue because it's kind of like a mystery detective. So there's a lot of exposition, and and because it was a web comic, I was just like kind of cramming a lot of information in an update. But as I was improving, I was adding more breather room and more variety in the pace. So there's like sort of quieter
Yeah.
moments inserted so that there's a better contrast. So I'm like doing more of these very sparse dialogue pages where the balloons are maybe a fragment of a sentence. And I actually like dialogue balloons with the ellipses because I think not
Yeah.
having words
So
never
there
having
are a
the
couple
balloon
different
there
ways to,
can
put
add a
some
lot of
space,
weight.
some time passing into your page. And then, your first two panels, you see the guy hesitating over calling, right? And then you can force someone to bring, no matter how fast they read, you can force someone to put some space into there by having a balloon that's full of ellipses, yeah? It's like, now, sucker, you'll be slowing down.
Yeah,
Well, it's basically a
like speed
pause,
bump.
a visual representation of.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And then, the kind of to contradict exactly what I said before about placing the bubble close to the person's head or their mouth when they're talking. I think an exception for me is when you want to build that pause in, and you want it to feel like the character is kind of aloof, or they're going through some mental stress or isolation. So sometimes I'll like have the
Yeah,
bubble really
right.
far
Set time to
and
breathe.
give that negative space there.
Yeah. Man,
Yeah,
I'm
so
all
that
about
there's this
loving that stuff because,
hesitation built in.
just the whole idea of the passage of time, the sort of pacing, like, when
Capturing
we're,
that on a page, yeah.
yeah, it's very difficult to do because, we talked about before how you keep yourself entertained while you're working. A lot of us listen to movies, right? Or comedians or something like that. And you really get an understanding of the flow of dialogue, the flow and the spacing. Even if you just go out to a cafe or some other, you go down to Starbucks, listening to the pace of people speaking. They don't speak in any kind of regular, fashion. There's a cadence and a rhythm to the dialogue. And trying to capture that in a printed form, very challenging, but also very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Okay, we're coming up on an hour. Do you have some more examples or? Nice. Okay. All right, I'm going to
That,
take the
that's
screen
all I
and show you
got.
how
No,
I
it's
went in
you.
a completely different direction. I have the same problems that everybody else has with comics, but I'll show you how I saw this for web comics because I'm not interested in print. Let me know when you got me.
We see you.
Okay, this is my comic, The Heartless, right? So let me show you my disaster page.
Yes.
Ta-da! Oh my God. What the hell is happening here? Let's fix this up for you. I have got a mixture of text and narration. These are actually thought balloons, but they don't look like balloons. They look like narration boxes. I showed this to Myung, and I thought she was going to have an aneurysm. So let me see if I can make my path here. Here, and this guy's thinking, but then he goes up here to complete this thought, and then it goes down like this, and then it goes over here, and comes this way, and that way, and this way, and then it comes down here, and then it goes off the page. Wow. That's pretty terrible. What I was really interested in here is establishing the relationship between these two characters, which isn't overt, because they're both emotionally constipated, and neither one of them says what they think. So what I wanted to do, it just wasn't working, in this sort of fashion. So what I decided to do was take this out of the page format altogether, all right? And what I did was just keep this one panel to let all of this dialogue play out in a way that had some space, all right? And this is the kind of things you can do if you have a webcomic, all right? So this is how I've deployed it on this site that I'm on. I just made it into the world's slowest refresh rate animation. So instead of working out the panels, I split the panels into different parts, and I let the user click through at their own pace, but I'm forcing the space into this dialogue by doing it this way. So this is...
It reminded me of those,
exactly.
Those Choose Your Own Adventure CD-ROM games.
Oh, what? Porn? Well, there isn't any
like
porn in mine.
porn.
But you see that I have a completely empty panel here, and I've done exactly what you were trying to do in the page, that we just saw, Myung. It's put some space into here where these two characters are just looking and thinking,
So it sounds like that one panel with the pacing you have here should be like a page and a half.
It should at least fit, or a spread. And so, because I didn't redraw the page, this was one way to do that. So if you take a look at the original, and we just went through, 10 panels?
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody can deal with this. So that is also one way to do it.
No, some people will read this, and actually I would, because while it is crowded, the flow is, once you accept the fact that it's crowded, it's pretty clear.
Let's just isolate this one panel so we can have the same kind of thing going on. And I'll take through my hideous red line. So even if you were to just have, the space is not working out, right? But even if you were just to have this one panel, very difficult. Because we start here, we go here. This guy is still talking, yes? So I think the distance that your eye has to travel from the initial balloon to the pointer that tells you who is actually speaking, if there is a disconnect there, that if you don't get it in time, the person just loses track, right? So it's supposed to be this, 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 this. Here's something that I just pointed out. You want to read the top bubble before you read the bottom bubble, right? But on the other hand, when you're going from left to right, this belongs to this character. But it's so, trying to keep the flow, it's so far away from this character that if I were to actually draw a tail, it would be one of those pointy death tails. Because it would go like this, yeah? It would be like a spear right into this guy's face. Ah!
Yeah. So for me as a comic reader, I feel like I'm visually greedy, and even though the flow technically is clear, for me, I would feel like you're depriving me of opportunity, to draw more art.
Yeah. What do you
so
mean,
I would immediately see this as a cop-out. No, as you did not want to you did not want to draw 2 pages or 3 pages. So you decided to
That's exactly right. And
so
when the reader can see through to what the artist is dodging, you've made an error. I'm not redrawing this shit. It's just a couple of heads talking. This will take forever. There's beer to be drunk, goddammit.
Well, but in addition, in this particular comic, there's a lot of playful banter, and because it's so subtle, I feel like being able to see the characters' facial expressions change is very important to me. And if I just see this profile and this whole banter going on with no change in expression,
So
then
this
I
page has
would
problems.
feel cheated.
Now, let me ask you a question. So, because I'm greedy and I like little lessons from my friends that are good at this stuff. If I was going to do this as a thought balloon, because this is what this guy is thinking. Yeah, this is his little internal narration. What's a better way to do this than this obvious fail of these little boxes? How would
I like
you
the
do that?
boxes.
Do you how? But
I don't like them crammed like that into one panel.
would you go with a box rather than doing some sort of dialogue balloon?
I would go with a box.
I think it would depend. Well, in this instance, can I see? Could you zoom in?
I mean, in some ways, I mean, how would you would do something like this, yeah?
I think it's okay. Well, I feel like it's okay in this case because it's not necessarily like a direct thought that he's having. It's more like narration. Like he's talking to the reader versus he's thinking to himself directly,
Yeah.
I don't know, in response to what Ice
Rather
is
than
thinking.
a thought balloon. Yeah.
It feels like it's a
thought
voiceover.
balloon that you just drew
almost.
looked really out of place with
Yeah.
this type of art to me. I have no idea why.
It would end up looking something like, so you would have, I mean, all right, you wouldn't cut it, okay, but then it would be something like that, and that would be your classic sort of thought balloon coming down. It looks awkward now. I think we've been trained out of that,
Yeah, we have.
Interesting, because it's a perfectly.
The way that Queenie was doing it in hers, where it was speech but not in a balloon, like it was just floating.
Like an outline. Interesting. Yeah.
It's just
Boy, we could go
free-floating.
on and on about that.
Yeah. I feel like for me, there's all these subtle grades of emotion, and sometimes that big, not necessarily, the poofy thought thing with the little cotton tail poofs, but something that's more softer than a dialogue balloon. Sometimes that works if it's like a final thought or something, and it's the only thing on the page. If it's something like really profound and thoughtful versus putting it, I don't know.
It could be as well that, I
think there's
also
places for
investigated having a different font for an internal monologue, and some people actually do that. They will have like a different font, and that will enable you, because this is the exact same dialogue font. Yeah. Yeah. So because I wasn't willing to spend a lot of time on
I actually
it,
like that.
I did the fastest thing, which was just to break it up into panels. Which, hey, this is hella fun for me, so I don't regret it. But I realized that if I were going to do it as a printed book, I would have to actually fix this problem.
I almost want you to take their heads, put it on a different layer, and do, a little like rotation.
Little animation.
Yeah.
Or it's blink.
Like,
I know. And it's funny you should say that, because when I looked through it before, after I had done it, because I spent a whole weekend, repackaging this stuff, I was like, why don't I put some animation in there? Why doesn't his mouth move? Why doesn't, and then I just, this is sort of completely different from what you would be doing on a page. Maybe I'll go down this route.
If you don't want to draw extra panels, don't do animation. It's even more work.
I know, and then I thought about that. Oh, God, there's got to be a way that's easier to make comics. There isn't. There isn't, kids.
No.
Well, okay. I feel like we've explored this. I feel like there's a lot more that we could do, talking about sort of the technical aspects of how you would express this or that. Myung, for example, has a dialogue bubble library where she has, she works digitally. So she's created this entire library of dialogue balloons that she can deploy, in Manga Studio. Svet, you do it in a completely different way, and then Queenie does it in an even a different way because she's using software called Adobe InDesign. So we could get into the technical aspects of it.
Right? InDesign does not have the capability?
She doesn't draw in that, but she puts the package together in that because she's dealing with these large swaths of text. And we know that Photoshop is not really the greatest for that, and Manga Studio sure as hell isn't. So she puts it all, she splits up the artwork and puts it all into InDesign. So various technical ways to go. But other than that, I feel like we've had some pretty good examples. They could not be more different. I love looking at other people's art. So if we had some final thoughts on Myung, how can you sum up our experience for us? No such thing as a shortcut.
No such thing as a shortcut.
Yeah, well, well, we all have very different examples. I think there were some overlaps. There are actually quite a few overlaps in just pacing, like that got represented in a lot of different ways, like margins, moving the dialogues away, or spacing them out.
I think if there's one thing I think we can definitely take away is the fact that margins are important. Margins on the page are important. Looking at Svet's stuff, what a difference. And looking at your early work for the way that the text tend to touch the outside of the bubbles. I understand, and then looking at my work where I'm clearly trying to save myself some time and effort by cramming as much stuff on a page as possible. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You have to have those margins. So putting the margins on the art, very important. Putting the margins on the text within the dialogue balloons, also very important. I think we understand that, the flow of the eye. I really like the idea of tracing this trajectory of, these balloons throughout the progress of the page, because we have a certain understanding that people do read things in a certain way, and you can use that to make the progression of your dialogue and your narration more logical and easier for people to understand. And we understand that there's different ways to express sort of different states of narration, whether it be overt speech, thinking, sort of voiceovers. Svet, how would you sum it up?
Watch this podcast and do everything we say.
Yeah, well, no, not what I say.
Don't do what Dee says.
Yeah, there's your constant right there. But everybody else, I think, very interesting. I love that everybody has different styles. It allows you to see that some things really are universal. So it's not just a question of how you do things, your own flair, your own style. There are certain rules that are common. Let's don't say rules. Let's say guidelines that are common to how you express these things. And if you want to break them, yeah, go on with your bad self. But there are consequences. And then having this sort of baseline understanding of how people approach your work, how they read it, your timing allows you to use that to get your story across. Very interesting. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. Unless anybody else has got anything else to say. We're going to turn it over to the podcast czar to come up with another title for us next week. Myung, you start thinking about that.
Well, yeah. Anybody has suggestions?
Yes, our friends and mothers, you should type
watching this podcast. You should type it into our channel. If there's a topic or even a piece of software,
they should send it to us first, and then we'll demo it.
I think between the six of us, there are so many different ways. Yeah, exactly. We kind of got it covered. Yeah. All right. Well, once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for following us on YouTube. And we will see you all again soon. Good night.
Good night.